Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're looking at the recently released Hitman 2 and seeing how it compares to its predecessor, Hitman from 2016. Thankfully, IO Interactive provided owners of the original game with an opportunity to play all of the missions available in the original game, which makes this easy to directly compare. And we can very clearly see many significant changes to the game's visuals that not only appear differently, but can even potentially affect your gameplay experience. But before we begin, I want to clarify that both versions are being tested here on the PC version of the game, running at the highest settings at a 1440p resolution. However, keep in mind that when I say the highest settings, I'm not taking into consideration the super sampling option, as we are running at the defaulted 100% preset and not the maximum 200%. Now to kick this off, let's first look at Agent 47 himself. Here we can see some obvious changes to the character model, making him look less like some creepy albino monster and a bit more human, though I'd argue he still looks pretty weird. You may have also noticed a few other minor changes here, especially the textures and the lighting. Now I'll get to the lighting in a bit, but let's first take a closer look at the textures here. It appears that the signature suit for 47 has been altered quite a bit, and it's easy to say that it's just a different cut of suit, but I think this newer design looks less impressive overall. Tiny details like the pattern on 47's red tie, the lapel, and even the creases and folds around the arm look more artificial in Hitman 2. The overall stitching of the jacket itself looks less impressive as well. You can't even see the shadow under his collar anymore. This is all cosmetic, however, and the actual character himself behaves identically to Hitman 1 in terms of animations. Moving on, we have environmental textures and detail. I went around and found identical locations between both games and took a close look at the texture to see if anything had changed when moving the missions over to the new game, and the textures appear to have been improved a tiny bit. Small details like these dark spots seem to stand out more and look less like smudges. Other than that, they are completely identical in about every way. But how about the lighting? Now, lighting is where we see some significant changes between the two games, and I'm not quite sure if it's for the better. Hitman 2 seems to feature an excessive amount of bloom, often blowing out images, especially in low light situations. This bar scene, for example, has blurry blue light hiding some of the finer details on the table, and there's a bit of an obnoxious lens flare added in as well. It reminds me a lot of the work IO Interactive did with Hitman Absolution and Kane and Lynch 2, and I'm not quite sure why they opted to return to that style. I noticed it in every level I tested, including Marrakesh and Bangkok, and it just feels off. Another issue I had with the lighting is the overall color tone. This really stands out in Sapienza, previously one of the better looking Hitman levels. Thanks to the new lighting design, the colors don't seem to pop anymore, and things like global illumination feel muted. It has this weird filter to it that I think might be related to that bloom I mentioned earlier. Shadows were one of the few things between these two games that looks practically identical, with that same blurry edge if you look close enough. It looks believable enough and works well with the various light sources built into the game world. Next up, we have special effects. Here's where Hitman 2 has a bit of an advantage. Like I said before, some of the changes seem to have affected the gameplay, and one of the Hitman franchise's original technical achievements way back in 2000 was its fully functional mirrors built into its levels. And for the first time in a Hitman game, these mirrors not only allow the player to see real-time reflections, but can also show NPCs a reflection. That's right, NPCs can now see you sneaking up on them through mirrors, which is an awesome new stealth gameplay mechanic that I rarely see in video games. And what's cooler, you can even fog up the glass with steam to hide your movement and sneak up on enemies. Next, there's been some very minor changes to things like the water effects. The actual standing water like wave simulation at the beaches of Sapienza look identical, but I did notice a big change to the water pouring out of the fountain at the start of the Paris level, which already looked pretty impressive in the original game. Water now seems to react to the simulated wind, helping immerse the player even more in the environment. Unfortunately, the effects haven't all improved. I did find a big downgrade to the game's smoke effects, especially in the Marrakesh level. These signal flares near the embassy in Marrakesh looked decent in the original game, but seem to have been reduced about 80% and look nowhere near as impressive. I never noticed any significant hit in performance when these effects were on screen, so I'm curious why this decision was made. And finally, we have some sound comparisons. Considering how similar these two games are, I went in expecting identical sound effects, but oddly enough, there's been a few minor changes. Now I'm going to play a few clips of ambient environments and a few weapons being fired, and you guys can decide, which game do you think sounds better?
Good evening, sir.
Hey, you are a sharp-dressed dude.
That is Viktor Novikov, head of Sanguine and ringleader of Iago. Quite the resume.
Good evening, sir. Welcome to Sanguine.
That is Viktor Novikov, head of Sanguine and ringleader of Iago. Quite the resume.
Hey, get your butt into gear or you'll be late.
Relax. It's all good. Just gotta put some pants on.
No, it's you who should relax. That attitude. I got you this job.
Hello,
You
sir.
disappoint Chef Marcello. I will.
I'll tell you for coffee.
Hey, where are you? Rocco! Rocco! You need to get down here now.
Tailor-made, sir.
That was an explosion, right?
And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Hitman 2 is kind of a mixed bag when stacked up to its older brother. Agent 47's face looks a bit more realistic, but the character model himself seems to have been reduced in quality, at least when looking at his signature suit alone. The new bloom effect and lighting design seems to hurt the overall image quality, and makes the environment feel less realistic. But things like the fountain redesign and the improved AI interacting with the game world reflections are a nice touch. Overall, Hitman 2 is filled with enough content that this reboot finally feels like a complete experience. But I would like to know why so many compromises had to be made overall. But what do you guys think? Do you like the changes? Let me know in the comment section, and if you want to learn more about Hitman, be sure to check out my History of Hitman video, where I go through and detail the full history of how this franchise came to be. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this posted every week.